Jesus, thanks for your church. I thank you for just the opportunity to stop each week on the first day of the week, to pause, to gather together with other people who are in pursuit of you, to ask questions, to encourage each other, to challenge each other, to support each other, to learn together, to open our mouths in praise and worship to you. All of these things that we do so that we can be formed into your likeness, Jesus. And that is our desire. Our desire is to know you, and we ask that you would just continue that process of changing the ways that we think that are not helpful and not righteous. That you would change our emotions and the ways that we get so wrapped up in ourselves. That you would change our behaviors, and that we become people who are more and more like you in the way that we behave, Jesus. Give us an expanding heart for our community, to love them, to care for them, and to meet their needs, their physical needs as well as their spiritual needs. Use us. We ask that you would cause the gospel to spread rapidly throughout Elizabethtown and Mount Joy and the surrounding communities. You'd give us wisdom as we seek your heart and what that means for us as we outgrow this space and think of other ways to serve our community. Speak to us in this process as we attempt to discern what it is that you're doing. We ask now as we turn our hearts to your word that you would speak to us, that we have ears to hear, you'd give us insight, and that we would grow because of it. It's in your name, Jesus, that we ask these things. Amen. A couple of weeks ago, Valerie and I and my wife were on a short couple-hour trip down to the ocean to spend a few days together. And en route to the trip, we were having a conversation in which she was just sharing some of the details of a book that she had been reading, the title of which is Alive. It's a book that is based on the true story of 49 people who were on an airplane in 1972, October of 1972. There were 49 passengers, most of whom were rugby players, and it was their family members, and they were on their way to a match, and they were ascending over the Andes Mountain when this massive cloud came, and the pilot made an error, and this picture that you see is taken inside the airplane just moments before the plane collided with the mountain. As the author of the book begins to explain what happened, he tells of a number of tragedies, a number of people who died instantly on the flight, as well as over the next several weeks and days, others who died. It was a challenging experience then of 16 survivors who survived avalanche, freezing cold temperatures on top of the mountain, no food available to them, and they were stranded there for 72 days. 72 days. How did they survive, you ask? It's one of the gruesome parts of the story. They survived by eating the flesh of those who had died in the tragedy. You see images here of the fuselage and how they would crawl into that space in order to stay warm, using the luggage to bar out the freezing cold temperatures. It was after 72 days that eventually 2 of the survivors trekked 10 days out through the mountains and eventually found help, and then a search party to come and recover the final 14. So 16 in total that survived. One of the themes that runs through this story, through this true story, is this question of faith. It's this question of what do you do when you find yourself amidst a tragedy. And there were those that were on that plane who said, we need to trust in God. We need to call out on God. We need to seek God to help us. And then the author and others struggled to believe that there is even a God to be trusted in. And so this question, how can we put our faith or how can we put our trust in God to get us out of this tragedy when there wasn't a God to prevent us from getting into the tragedy in the first place? And so as Valerie and I, we drove along, this was the question that we discussed, especially as we were thinking about and talking about family and friends who are going through devastating situations in life. We are at the grandparent stage, and some of our friends are also grandparents, and some of our friends are walking through very difficult challenges of grandchildren who are born and are born prematurely and are just hanging on by a thread. And these grandparents are walking alongside of their own children as they are the parents of children that are just hanging on. We also talk about others in relationship, those that are struggling in their marriage relationship and struggling to decide, are we going to stay together? And others who have walked through the horrifying end of a relationship and are now journeying through divorce and all that means for them. And then we're reflecting on those that are sick and those that are struggling with cancer and heart issues, and even reflected on the horrible diagnosis of our 2.5-year-old son way back in 2000 of leukemia, and then his death 2 years later. And as we just kind of were thinking about the tragedies, the difficulties, the hardships that people experience in life, we can identify with this question. This question of how can you trust in a God who didn't prevent the tragedy in the first place? How can I trust in this God while I'm walking through tragedy? And this, of course, is the big question that people ask all the time when they're experiencing hardships, right? I mean, as a nation, right, we're dealing with the whole crazy thing of somebody who takes rifles and guns and kills children in a mass on their first week of school. It's just, and then that person, the shooter, scrawls that question. Now, where is your God now? I mean, this is the world in which we live. It is what it means to be a human being, is it not? To deal with the hardships and the tragedies of life. And the big question is how do you navigate that? And this is what people have been wrestling with thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I've probably touched on this topic in sermons probably 20, 30, 40 times in my 30 years of ministry, at least that many times. The big questions. And this morning, rather than get into the weeds of the conversation, we're going to look at the biblical text, okay? We're going to look at the Genesis. We're nearing the end. For those of you who are just kind of joining us, we have been in a series that started way back in the beginning of January. Genesis, it all starts here. And we have been picking up topics and themes along the way and things that we deal with in daily life. And we just keep saying, it all started back in Genesis. You can see these things in Genesis. And you can see these tragedies, people living through tragedy in the book of Genesis. And as we come to the end of the story of Jacob and Joseph, today we're going to see how it is that you journey through these struggles. And the answer to that question, the answer to the question of how is it that I deal with the tragedies of life is just really simple. It's just I put my faith in a God who's faithful, and I just live by faith through it. Now this is a very calculator kind of an answer. And as I've thought about this message today, it's not one that gets into the weeds. Today's message is more. It's like, here's the answer really quickly. Here's the answer. We're gonna just see the answer very simply. It's in some ways it doesn't get into the questions in our heart to unpack them. It's kind of like a math problem. You know, as I was thinking about like how to illustrate today's message before we even get into it, it's like saying, do you know what the answer is to 23,967 times 9,522 divided by 43? You know what that answer is? I mean, you could spend some time with a big long piece of paper, right, and a pen, and go ahead and do the mathematical equations. Right? And the math on that would take you a little while, and there would be a lot of additions and subtractions and multiplications and divisions and all these kinds of things that you would do. And you might go on the back of a piece of paper as you keep going, and it might take you 30 minutes to solve the problem. But I'm pretty confident that those of you who are adults who are sitting in this room who've passed high school math could solve the problem, right? It would take you a little while, but you could solve the problem. And here's the point of the illustration. If you take a calculator, and I punched it in a calculator, and I solved the problem in as long as it took me to type in 23,967 times 952 divided by 43. And the answer is 5,307,297.067674418. That's the answer. Really simple solution. You could solve it too, right? Today's message is just like sticking the question in a calculator and just getting it coming out at you. And that's what we're going to get out of the text. The text doesn't get into the weeds of where is God amidst all of these tragedies. The text really doesn't even talk a whole lot about the tragedies, but it does talk about the answer. And the answer, when I'm dealing with tragedy in life, is I need to walk by faith through the hardships of life. I walk by faith, even though I can't figure out the answer, even though I'm not doing all the math. I just walk by faith, believing that God is faithful. That's how I do it. Now, I know this is really complex. This next slide here, I grabbed some calculus problem. And my son, I got a son who's a mechanical engineering student, and he's always talking about, oh, Dad, you should know this and that. I'm like, and some of you are people who understand what's there. I mean, this is just a bunch of scribbles to me. I mean, I just Google it, like, give me a calculus problem. I don't even know if this is really a problem. Some of you are there looking at it and trying to figure it out, and probably, and I know a couple of you engineers here who know. The point of that illustration is just simply to say this question is like a calculus problem to the rest of us. You look at it, and it doesn't make any sense. Where is God, right? Where is God amidst the tragedies of life? Can I trust that there really is a God? Or do I just walk away? Which kind of leads you really to that big question, right? Or maybe to say it like this, the options that you have. You can either choose to just kind of believe in yourself and go your own way, right? You can trust in yourself and do what you want to do. Or you can put your trust in God and do what it is that He says. And you would choose to do that because God has demonstrated Himself to be faithful. God has demonstrated Himself to be faithful. And therefore, I'm going to choose to walk by faith in the challenges of life. Okay, so that's it. That's the message, right? This is the whole message right here. And now we're going to go to the text, and we're just going to pull out the answer. I'm just going to help us to see this. So again, it's the book of Genesis. Today we're chapter 45, 46, 47. We're going to be running. We've run a lot through this whole series, haven't we? There's so much in the book of Genesis. But today, what we're going to find in verse 1 of chapter 45 is immediately follows where we left off last week, and the great challenge that the test, the final exam that Joseph had given to his brothers, right? And in which he ordered his steward to put his cup back in the sack of Benjamin and to send them all off with silver and to then have them only called back in because that cup was in Benjamin's sack, and for Joseph to then confront his brothers. What is this that you have done? And that was the big question that we looked at. What is this that you have done? And we traced how through 8 times in the book of Genesis that phrase comes up, and how 8 times, or 7 prior times, people, what is it that you have done? They didn't own what it was that they did. But how we ended last week was with the brother Judah acknowledging the wrong that they have done in selling their brother Joseph and all the wrong that they, and the brothers that are on their knees, that are on their face, they've thrown themselves begging for mercy before Joseph. And this is where we pick up the story then. Verse 1, chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph." You can only imagine the shock in this moment in which Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers, whom they have not seen for more than 22 years, whom they had pushed into a pit, pulled out of the pit, sold for 20 pieces of silver, and now on their faces in front of this terrifying second of command leader in Egypt, he reveals himself as their brother. Oh, what must have raced through their minds in that moment of just probably sheer terror. Now what is he going to do with us? Now he's telling us, now we know this is our brother whom we so mistreated. How is he going to treat us? We've already experienced all the things that he's done so far. But what is it he says? He says, "I'm Joseph," and then he asks, "Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were just terrified at his presence. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they'd done so, he said, "I'm your brother Joseph. Remember the one that you pushed into a pit and sold for 20 pieces of silver? I'm the guy you sold off to Egypt. It really is me." By describing himself this way, he's verifying, like, how would this second man in control know that about them? Unless it was indeed Joseph. And now, it's interesting what Joseph says. He says, "And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but it was God. And he made me father to Pharaoh," meaning a father offers wisdom to his children. Joseph offers wisdom and has offered wisdom to Pharaoh. "He has made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all of Egypt." What do you make of this? Well, there's a couple of things just quickly to highlight. How is it that you work through tragedy? How is it that you make your way through tragedy? Well, again, we go back to how is it? We put our trust in God. That's how we do it. And why? Because God is faithful. And how is it that we know that God is faithful? Well, right here, Joseph is helping his brothers understand that God is faithful to what it is that God has promised to Father Abraham, to Father Isaac, and to their father Jacob, that he would bless them, that he would take care of them, that he would make them fruitful, that they would amass in numbers, and they would bless the world. That is the theme. We have come back to this over and over and over again in this book. And here, in this moment in which the brothers are terrified because of all of the wrong, the tragedy that they brought upon Joseph, Joseph says, wait a minute. Your intent was to do evil to me, but it was God's intent to do good. You were not very loving. It was in hatred that you threw me into a pit, but it was in faithfulness that God took me out of that pit and brought me here to Egypt. And in this little section, we see that age-old tension between God, or between people and their responsibility for how they live, and that God enables and gives us the ability to make choices, to which too often we choose to do that which is wrong. So there's this tension between the brothers who did evil, and clearly they're labeled as being the ones who did evil. They did wrong. They put him in the pit. They sold him off. Can you imagine doing this to a brother? How heartless this is. They sold him off. Yes, you did that with evil intent. But God, who is faithful, who is over all of these things, out of faithfulness, brought me here. Out of love, out of provision, out of faithfulness to his covenant, he brought me here. So how's it you get through tragedy? How is it that Joseph gets through tragedy? How is it that Jacob gets through tragedy? How is it that all the people in the book of Genesis get through tragedy? What we're being taught through the book of Genesis is how you get through tragedy is you go just one day after the next day and you walk through it in faith in a God who shows himself to be faithful. And as we're getting to the end of the book, this is the big point. This is the big thing. That God's faithful. God, he's preserved. He sent me here to preserve. If God hadn't sent me here, think of where we would be. If I wasn't here second in command, if God hadn't revealed to me there was going to be these years in which there was going to be a whole lot and that we saved up all of this food, if God hadn't revealed that to me, if God hadn't brought me here to Egypt, if I didn't have to go through all of the horrific things of being mistreated by Potiphar, of being thrown into prison, being left in prison, if I didn't have to go through all of that in which I was then drawn out by Pharaoh, if it wasn't you that threw me into the pit and did this, I wouldn't be here. God would not be, or we would not have this provision that God is providing to us to preserve us as a family. God is preserving us as a family. He's being faithful to that promise. I'm going to bless you and turn you into a great nation. Otherwise, we would have withered up and died out in Canaan. This is so profound that Joseph, in this moment, and put yourself in the situation of Joseph, in responding to your brothers who sold you, and how much emotion that Joseph has been, and the thoughts that Joseph has been processing over this 6-month, year time period that he has had to navigate and work through this, is when the brothers first showed up, and then they went back, and then they come back, and his response when he finally reveals himself is to say, oh, guys, don't beat yourself up. Yes, you were sinful. Yes, you did what was wrong. Yes, you mistreated me. But it was God who's being faithful to what he says that he's going to do, who brought me here. God is being faithful. This is remarkable. How do you get through your tragedy? Day by day, you just trust that God is good. He's worth being trusted, because he's been faithful throughout the generations, as the song that we just sang. God sent me ahead of you to preserve you, to save you, to make me father of Pharaoh. So let's continue. So Israel, so what Joseph does, right? He says, go home, get dad, bring dad back. And so there's this whole reunification thing, this relocation thing. They get relocated. Bring them back here. We don't want to stay in Canaan. Canaan is in famine, even though that's the promised land. Go get dad. So they go back home. They tell their dad everything. That ends chapter 45. We get into 46. They're on their way, and this is what happens. So Israel set out with all of his sons and with all that he had. And when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to God, to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel. And again, remember how we've been pointing out over and over here over the past few chapters that it's no longer Jacob, but it's Israel. Jacob is being called Israel. This is the name that God has given him. And remember, after all, it is the nation of Israel. But it's the nation of Jacob, because his name has been changed. And so God speaks to Israel in a vision at night, and he said, Jacob, Jacob, here I am, he replied. And then God says to him, I'm God. I'm the God of your father. And God said, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. And I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. Now, this is the same God who's appeared to Jacob several times in dreams and visions and interactions in which Jacob had wrestled with God. Jacob had received this promise earlier in his life on his way to find a wife. And here God again is just coming along and he's reassuring him and he's reminding him. So God speaks to him and he says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm going to bring you back again. Again, going back to this covenant that God made with Abraham, the covenant that God made with Isaac, and the covenant that God had made with Jacob himself. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to turn you into a great nation. I'm going to give you this land. I'm going to bless the world through you. God is demonstrating again himself to be faithful to that which it is that he has said decades and decades earlier. Story keeps going. Eventually Jacob arrives. He settles in. He arrives, and then Joseph says to him, hey, we need to introduce you to Pharaoh. So Joseph went and told Pharaoh, verse 1 of chapter 47. Now we're going to jump to 47. Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and brothers, with their flocks and their herds and everything they own, they've come from the land of Canaan, and they're now here in Goshen. And he chose 5 of his brothers. That's interesting. He didn't send 11 of them. He just took 5 of them and presented them before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh asked the brothers, what's your occupation? And your servants are shepherds, they replied to Pharaoh, and just as our fathers have been. And they also said to him, we've come to live here for a little while. Note that. We've come here to live for a little while, right? This is not our home. Egypt is not our home. Canaan is our home. Because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now please let your servants settle in Goshen. Now Joseph had already instructed his brothers to talk about Goshen. Goshen is this place where there's lots of green grass and place for flocks to be. It's also far away from the Egyptians. We'll see that here in a second. Let's keep reading. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers. Where? Where? In the best part. In the best part. Give them the best land that there is. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. So now the Israelites settled in Egypt, in the region of Goshen. I'm jumping down to verse 27. They acquired property there, and they were fruitful, and they increased in number. Remember that covenant? I'm going to bless you. I'm going to turn you into a great nation. You're going to be blessed physically, materially. You're going to have a bunch of kids. You're going to have land, and I'm going to bless the entire world through you. So Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life was 147. So this kind of summarizes Jacob's life. But to highlight this, Pharaoh gives Israel the best part of the land, and they increase greatly in number. Now, again, this is another ironic thing in the way in which God works. So the Egyptians, what do we know about the Egyptians? We learned this a couple weeks ago, right? The Egyptians don't like shepherds. They have an aversion to them. Egyptians see themselves as superior to shepherds. Therefore, even though Joseph is a shepherd, he can't even eat with the Egyptians. We saw that last week, right? And so the Pharaoh, what does he do? He says, you guys go live over there. Where? Over there? Over there happens to be what? The best part of the land. Now, what's fascinating is that I skipped through a whole bunch of stuff in chapter 47, in which, and 6, in which Joseph amasses basically for the Pharaoh all of the land from all of the Egyptians. But guess who doesn't get the land amassed from them? Jacob and his sons. So Israel, the nation of Israel, is formed in the best part of Goshen, separated from Egypt, allowed to acquire this land, and what happens to them? They greatly increase. We know that we're almost near the end of Genesis, and when you get to the end of Genesis, if you flip the page, you get to Exodus. And 400 years transpires between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. And Exodus begins with, there's this massive number of people. So this Pharaoh who knew Joseph, that Pharaoh died. And there's another king that comes up and he looks over at all these people living in Goshen who have this land that has been given to them. And there are millions of people over there. And they're threatened by that. Egypt is threatened by that. So what is it that we're seeing here? Again, we're seeing that God is faithful. God does what God says he's going to do. He's fulfilling the covenant. He's blessing them. He's turning them into a great nation. He's giving them, meeting their needs and providing through them a blessing to the rest of the world, which we see next. So Joseph, after the brothers are there and after the Pharaoh sends them out, Joseph then brings his father in. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh. Now, after Jacob blessed Pharaoh, after Jacob did what? Blessed Pharaoh. He did what? He blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked him, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "All the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." I'll come back to that segment in a second, but we've got to end with this. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Jacob did what? He blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. Now, what's the big emphasis on this? Well, again, this is a demonstration of God's faithfulness. I'm going to bless you, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm going to turn you into a great nation. I'm going to give you great wealth, and I'm going to bless the world. I'm going to bless other nations through you. And what do we see here? But Jacob, the guy who stole a blessing. Remember, this is how the story of Jacob begins. Right? We find him stealing his brother's blessing, which then he had to run from his brother. This little conniving character, Jacob, right, who stole a blessing, is now doling out blessings. Next week, Pastor Joe's going to wrap up the series talking all about the blessing of Jacob upon his sons. But here it's the blessing of Jacob upon Pharaoh, and thereby not only blessing Pharaoh, but the nation of Egypt. And what is it that we see? Again, but the faithfulness of God. I'm going to do this. We see God doing what he says he's going to do. And this is why, when you're amidst the tragedies of life, Jacob, who walked through all kinds of tragedies in life, a lot of them self-induced. He was deceptive, lying, right? But think of the tragedies, and again, remember how the story of Joseph started. It really started with, and this is the account of Jacob, now Joseph, right? But this whole thing about Joseph is really about Jacob. And what do we find about Jacob is Jacob has had a hard life, which takes us to the next point. I want to just emphasize here really quickly, how is it that you get through the struggles of life? Well, now we're getting to the place of just highlighting that Jacob lived a difficult life. So his answer to the Pharaoh was, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130, and my years have been few and difficult." Few and difficult. Few and difficult. It seems to stand in contrast to Deuteronomy chapter 5, which says, those who honor their father and mother will be blessed with long life and good life. It seems as though Jacob is, in his answer, is stating that in contradiction to, not in contradiction, but meaning I haven't lived up to having a long and good life because I haven't lived a good life. So my life has been few, and my years have been few, and my life has been difficult. I've struggled along in life. And again, if you think of his challenges, it starts off with deception, conflict with his brother, fighting over stealing his brother's birthright, deceiving his father Isaac, having to flee and run for the safety of his own life. Eventually, he arrives in Padan Aram, right? And he sees Rachel, and he wants to marry her, and so he works for 7 years for his father-in-law Laban, but his father-in-law tricks him, gives him Leah, so now he's got 2 wives. The 2 wives are barren. Rachel can't have children for many, many years. Leah had children initially, but then she was barren. And there's that tension of living with what it means to not be able to have children. And Jacob had to live with this. And then as his story continues, it's a father-in-law who cheated him 10 times. It's a daughter who gets raped. Just on and on, the tragedies that Jacob has endured in life. And as he's standing in front of Pharaoh, And Pharaoh says, how old are you? He says, man, I have had a long, difficult life. And actually, it's short in comparison to my grandfather Abraham, who lived 175 years, and my father, who lived 180. My life is short here at 130, and it's just been hard. It's just been hard. Which connects with us, right? This connects with us because this is the reality of life. We, too, have experienced in life the favoritism, not being the favored one. Jacob showed favoritism to Joseph. Right? We, too, have experienced deception. We, too, have experienced the death of somebody that we love, Jacob's wife, Rachel, who dies. And on through the tragedies of life. Jacob knows what it is to live a tragic life. But what we see in the very end of his life is that he's a man, at least at the end, who's definitely living by faith. It's fascinating how the chapter 47 ends. It ends with Jacob talking to Joseph, and he says, look, I'm going to eventually die. And when this happens, verse 30, he says, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried. Well, where is it that they're buried? Well, the end of 49, verse 29 tells us this is where it is that Abraham was buried. Then he gave them this instructions. This is Jacob talking to Joseph. I'm about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of the Ephron, the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite, along with the field. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. Bury me with Leah. This is maybe the only time that Leah is spoken of fondly in the life of Jacob. Bury me next to Leah. Not Rachel, but Leah. The field and the cave in it that were bought from the Hittites. There's this certain sense as you read the end of Jacob's life and the end of this story that Jacob understands that God is faithful. He's working out his promise, that indeed he's going to continue to keep working even after he dies. And you got to take me back home. And somehow, in some way, even though right now we're living in Egypt, and right now it's soon to be famine time, and it's going to get even worse, and we're going to be amidst these difficult tragedies in life. Even though that's true, God is still faithful. And so when you're in it, remember what God promised. And so when I die, take me back home. Take me back home. I'm going to invite our worship team to come on back up. You know what's interesting is that as we are coming to the end of the book of Genesis, and you kind of think about what this story has been about, really, primarily we spent most of our time with Abraham, Isaac, very little really with Abraham and Isaac, but a fair amount with Abraham and Isaac. Most of our time has been with Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Joseph, these four patriarchs, these four fathers of the faith, right? These four men to whom God has given this covenant blessing. And it's interesting that the book of Genesis, you might read that and think, oh, that's really what it's all about. It's just these guys' story. But really, that's not what it's all about. Really, it's about them living by faith. Living by faith amidst tragedy. It's fascinating when you flip to the New Testament and you go to the book of Hebrews chapter 11, which is known as the Great Faith chapter. And you start reading through Hebrews 11. There's 36 people that are identified in Hebrews 11, 20 of whom are these characters in the book of Genesis. It's First of all, it's Abel, and then first it's Enoch, and then it's Abel, and then it's Noah, and then we run into Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And as you read through Hebrews 11, this great faith chapter, in which we're reminded that to please God, you have to be a person who lives by faith, and that living by faith is just being absolutely certain. You're just certain that what is promised is going to become reality. And you get into Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 21, and we find the writer of Hebrews saying this: "It is by faith that Jacob, when he was dying, blessed Joseph's sons, and he worshiped as he leaned on top of his staff." You get this just strong sense that Jacob became a man of faith. I don't know where you're at this morning in your faith journey. You may be just struggling along. You may be feeling like the reality may be you are in the pit, just like Joseph was in a pit. Or you may be fleeing as Jacob was fleeing. And there's many of us who are. We're just struggling through life. And the struggles, they go up and they go down. But life is hard. The question is, how are you going to live? Do you think you got it all figured out? You think you can just live independently, live in and of your own self, live in and of your own knowledge, and just trust in yourself to live? God gives you that option. You can do that. Most people live that way. This text teaches us that's not the best way to live, because God is faithful. Because God is faithful, whatever tragedy that you're in right now, you just keep walking by faith. You keep walking by faith, hanging on to the promises that he promises that one day is coming. We're all going to be out of here. All of us who put our faith in Jesus Christ, we're going to be out of here. And then that day, when we cross over from life here to life eternal, then everything will be perfect, everything will be good, everything will be right. In the meantime, when we live according to what it is that God says in his word, we experience life as we are faithful to what it is that he teaches us, how he calls us to live. We experience life amidst the tragedy. And so there is hope, and there is joy, and there is peace to be found while we struggle as we follow him. Church, let's stand and sing this following closing song together.
God is the way maker, always working, even when we don't see it. Sing. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are here. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Yeah. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here.
here. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you, yeah. I worship you. Yeah, you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Yeah. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't see that you're working, you never stop, you never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. Sing it out in belief. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. Waymaker, waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. You are here, moving in our midst. We worship you. We worship you. You are here, touching every heart. We worship you. We worship you.
Sometimes it's good to do the long math. Some of you may be doing the long math on this question. You're just never going to get to the answer, though. Maybe you just need to go, you know what? Today, I'm just going to punch in the calculator. Just let the calculator tell me the answer. God is faithful. I'm just going to surrender to that answer. I'm just going to trust. I'm just going to trust the calculator. I'm going to trust God's word. I'm going to just trust what we just read through the book of Genesis. I'm just going to trust and believe that God is faithful. God has me in this tragedy. You know, one of the things, my wife just leaned over and said this to me. You know, one of the things about all these people in the book of Genesis, They didn't know the end of the story. We get the benefit of knowing the end of the story. So they were still living in the tragedy. Hebrews 11 tells us this. And they went to their death not knowing the end of the story. They didn't even have that benefit that we have. I just invite you today, just take the calculator answer. Have a good week.